All right, so in this explainer, we're digging into a pretty provocative theological treatise from 2026, written by an author who just goes by Dr. Roots. It's a full-throated, unapologetic defense of what they call divine order. And we're going to break down some of its most, well, challenging arguments.
So right out of the gate, the treatise throws down this gauntlet. Silence is not wisdom, but cowardice. I mean, that sets a really urgent, almost confrontational tone from the very first sentence. It's making it clear, this isn't just some dry academic paper. It's meant to be a call to action.
Okay, so section 1 is all about a bold declaration. The author really doesn't waste any time. They just lay out the 6 core claims that are going to be the foundation for this entire document. Let's take a look at what they are. And here they are. This is basically the roadmap for the whole thing. You can see how the argument builds, right? It starts with the very nature of God, then makes this really bold claim about Rastafarianism, and then it gets into morality, the family, and a pretty strong critique of the LGBTQ movement. So yeah, we're going to follow this structure, point by point. All right, let's dive into that first thesis. Section 2, one God, many names. So the whole worldview here is built on this one core idea, divine singularity, the absolute oneness of God.
And to make this point, the author really centers the argument on this one verse, the Shema. It's presented as like the ultimate theological claim for all Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The whole argument is that it's all pointing to a single, unified divine being. But here's where it gets really interesting. The whole argument kind of hinges on the specific language used. The treatise points to the Hebrew word for one, which is echad. And the claim is that this word doesn't just mean one as in, a single isolated thing. It means a unified oneness, an integrated whole. And believe me, this distinction is absolutely crucial for everything that comes next.
So this slide really breaks down that idea. The author makes a sharp distinction between God's identity and God's names. The identity, according to the text, is this one eternal, unchanging reality. But the names, Yahweh, Allah, Jah, those are presented as human, cultural ways of talking about that one identity. So the point is, they aren't different gods competing with each other.
Okay, so once that foundation of one God is set, the treatise makes a pretty sharp turn. This brings us to section 3, where the author starts to build a case for Rastafarianism being the, quote, purest form of Christianity.
And a central piece of evidence for this is a verse from Psalms. It's interpreted here as a prophecy, basically saying that Africa has this special, divine destiny. The treatise claims that Rastafari really embraced this as a core theological idea, while, it argues, European Christianity kind of pushed it aside.
Now, this is super important to understand. The author isn't saying Rastafarianism is some new religion. No, the argument is that it's original Christianity, but a version that's been stripped of European colonial baggage, what the text calls the machinery of Babylon. In other words, it's framed as a version of the faith that refused to be colonized. From there, the treatise moves from theology to morality. Section 4, a divine compass. And here, the author takes direct aim at what they call the dangerous disease of moral relativism, the idea that right and wrong are just matters of opinion. Instead, it argues for a fixed, unchanging moral framework.
The author pulls this quote from the prophet Isaiah to back this up. The point being made is that good and evil aren't just, flexible ideas that change from culture to culture. The treatise presents them as real, objective categories, things that are baked into the very nature of God.
So you might be asking, okay, how does the author define this morality then? Well, the text lays out this 3-part test for basically any action. First, you look at its purpose. Is it doing what it was divinely designed to do? Second, you check the motivation. Is your heart in the right place? And third, the direction. Is this leading you towards life and God, or away towards death and separation? That's the basic framework right there.
And this is where that moral framework gets applied in a very specific way. We're now in section 5, which is all about the family's divine design. This is really a central theme of the whole document, where the ideas of order, role, and harmony get fleshed out.
So the author goes all the way back to the Genesis creation story. And the interpretation here is that when woman was created from Adam's rib, it wasn't a sign that she's lesser than him. Not at all. It's seen as a symbol of partnership. The text really emphasizes that she was taken from his side. And the argument is that's so she could walk beside him as an equal. And to back this up even more, the author again goes back to the original Hebrew. The word that's often translated as helper is ezer.
But the treatise makes a huge point of this. That same exact word, ezer, is used over and over in the Old Testament to describe God as Israel's helper. So the argument is, how could that word imply being subordinate? It's presented as a role of incredible strength and honor.
So what you end up with is this idea of distinct but equal roles. The husband's calling is to be the sacrificial servant leader type, while the wife's is to be that powerful ezer, a partner with equal dignity. The text is very clear. This is not about a hierarchy of who's more valuable. It's presented as a harmony of two different complementary designs. Okay, so after defining this specific family structure, the treatise then contrasts it directly with contemporary movements. It quotes from the book of Romans, and based on this verse, the author argues that the LGBTQ movement is a departure from this divine design and what it calls natural use. It's framed as something that happens when a culture turns away from God.
And all of this brings us to the final, concluding section of the treatise, titled The Answer to Babylon. This is where everything comes together, and the author frames our modern world as a kind of spiritual battlefield, with the family acting as a fortress in the middle of it.
Now, when the author talks about Babylon, they're using it as a symbol. It's not the ancient city. In the treatise, Babylon is defined as any human system, political, cultural, even academic, that sets itself up against God's divine order. The text actually calls it a spirit of rebellion. So after laying out this big, corrupting threat of Babylon, you might expect some kind of complicated 10-point plan to fight it. But the treatise doesn't do that. Instead, it boils it all down to just one primary solution, one antidote to all this.
And here it is. The antidote is the family. This is the final thesis of the entire work. The idea that a family, operating according to this biblical blueprint, is the single most powerful force there is to stand against what the author calls civilizational decay. It's even called God's first and greatest institution.
So the treatise doesn't just end there. It positions the family as something more than just a private, personal thing. It's presented as the fundamental building block of all civilization. And that leaves us with the final, pretty provocative question it poses. What does it mean for us as individuals and for our society as a whole if we start to view the family as the primary answer to our biggest problems?